So now let's start doing, or I should start with, good morning, party people. I can't believe I didn't, those weren't like the first words out of my mouth. Good morning, party people, and welcome to office hours. So you can post questions over at the URL at polgab.com/room/Brent, and I'll go through and take the top voted questions. Now, I'll tell you what, the top voted question, number one on there for Chrisbell, I actually saw this go in, and as soon as it went in, the same person kept opening up new incognito browser windows, trying to upvote their question like crazy to get it to the top. So first off, shame on you. Second, you're going to be a little disappointed with the answer, because the question was, we've been facing thread starvation issues, and we can't log into the SQL Server when that happens. How do we troubleshoot it? Well, I have a whole module on that in my Mastering Server Tuning class. If you go to my training, brentozar.com, and click Training up at the top, the Mastering Server Tuning class, I have a whole module based on thread pool. This is what happens when you upvote your own question like 24 times. I don't bother answering it. You're going to have to pay for the answer. Someone has to pay for all these nice meals that I have and all the good booze that I drink. Next up, we have Lou. Lou says, we disable TLS 1.0 and 1.1 on our servers. How does that affect our SQL Server and SSIS jobs? Oh, Surly Dev, good to see you. So how does that, if we disable, let me start over. If we disable TLS 1.0 and 1.1 on our SQL servers, how does that affect things? Things may not be able to log in if they don't support TLS 1.2. What you're doing is you're only allowing TLS 1.2 for security purposes. That's great. Not all applications may support that. So you probably could try leaving the old ones on, but as long as you leave the old ones 1.0 and 1.1 on, then apps are just going to continue to rely on those. So it's a kind of a weird situation where you have to go to 1.2, find out what breaks, and then go talk to the people who own those applications. Let's see here. So, Surly Dove asked how I am. I'm doing very well, other than the wild, of course, technical glitches of dealing with what happens with a new streaming app. Working back with old Streamlabs desktop, used to be known as Slobs, in order to make it easier for me to have things like pop-ups when people subscribe or follow, which is kind of nifty. Drop Table Employee says Twitch now does midstream ads. Well, you can circumvent those by becoming a subscriber, which I should mention over in the Twitch chat. If only there was a way to get around that, like perhaps subscribing. That would be a hint. I'm not very good at hints. So, it's really funny. For a while there, I was doing streaming on Twitch, YouTube, and Facebook all at the same time. And when you do that, you can't make money on Twitch. Twitch won't let you sell ads and things like that. They don't write you monthly checks if you live stream across multiple platforms. But if you do live stream just only on Twitch and nothing else, they pay you money. I want to say the last check I got, or the last monthly deposit I got, was like $300. So my thing with that is for the longest time I was like, well, I want to subscribe, I want to stream everywhere to reach as many people as possible. But you know what I realized? Live commenters on YouTube are terrible. Hey, Andy Leonard says new subscription renewal. Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. Woo! Live commenters over on YouTube were terrible, and right now, as people are watching a recording later on YouTube, they're going to be like, live commenters on YouTube aren't terrible, that's me, I'm really smart. And I'm like, they're not as smart as people on Twitch. People on Twitch, and I'm not just saying this because, we're live streaming on Twitch, but people on Twitch who are live, the caliber of questions seems to be very high. Surly Def says $300 is a new dust cap for one of your cars. Yesterday, I had to swipe a credit card for $2,500 for repairs to the Jaguar hardtop, which is sitting in the garage, and things just disintegrate over time. It wasn't that I don't drive it. I drive it all the time. But you know how it is with cars, that cars just gradually disintegrate over time, and sure enough, it was $2,500 in repair bill. Then Eve, bless her heart, Eve was like, cars just disintegrate sitting in garages, and I'm like, oh yeah, this is sad but true. Okay, so let's go take another question, see what else is next, highest voted up. Macrieum, it's kind of a creepy name. Macrieum says, I'm at the beginning of my SQL career, and I'm trying to set up a query that runs across a bunch of SQL servers and centralizes the results. How should I do it? The answer that I'm going to give you is going to seem sarcastic. Write an app. I don't care whether you do it with C#, PowerShell, Python, whatever. You're going to have some kind of application that connects to each SQL server, because when you're dealing with 50 SQL servers, one of them will be down. Sooner or later, queries are going to fail for all kinds of reasons. You're not going to be able to connect to the SQL server. It'll be in the midst of a failover. There's going to be blocking. The server's going to be under extreme CPU pressure. You should expect one of those queries to fail. And when we work inside SQL Server itself, it has really crappy error handling. Apps have great error handling. Use an app. Don't try to do what you're describing within SQL Server. Leads to a world of hurt. Next up, RoJo asks, what's the best way to patch SQL Server? If only there were some kind of place on the internet where you could type in your questions and maybe include the term Brent Ozar to get my opinion. And then if only there were tools, places where we could write, I don't know, log our opinions in a binary way. We could maybe call them blogs or blogs. And I could write an answer to how you patch SQL Server, and then people could search for that question with my name and find that answer. It just so happens there is one. It's called google.com, or you can use DuckDuckGo or Yandex or whatever it is that you feel like using. But if you search for how to patch SQL Server Brent Ozar, that's a really common question. I've got a detailed post that explains exactly how to do that. So I'll leave you free to ask ChatGPT. There you go. Next up, don't bother asking, asks a really good question. Says, and I'm not saying just because he says I love my work. They have a database where they've got a lot of personally identifiable data, and they're encrypting it. And the longer that this application lasts, the longer that queries take. Because when he goes to query it, it's taking progressively longer to scan that data. So I bet what's happening is your queries don't have indexes to support what you're searching for. Believe it or not, yes, you can index encrypted data as long as you're doing the index or the encryption over on the app side, not the SQL Server side. If you're doing encryption over on the application side, like with SQL Server's always encrypted feature, then you can actually index the columns that you want to search for. One other part of that, if you do the encryption on the app side, is you also need to be doing equality searches. You don't want to be doing like searches. But that makes sense with things that are encrypted for personally identifiable reasons, like what you put up there, names, birth dates. I want to search for one exact birth date. I want to search for one exact social security number. I don't want to find all the social security numbers that are like something. If you're doing like searches, those are most likely going to suck. No pun intended. If you're doing equality searches and you do the encryption on the app side and you index the related columns, you'll be fine. But those are the guidance that you have to follow there. Kalfr asks a question, and I feel so bad for Kalfr because this question is really terrible. Kalfr said, and it's not the question's terrible. The question's great. It's my answer that's going to be terrible. What are the best options for oops query recoveries when you have always on availability groups? Oh, this sucks. You can't easily do a database restore because a database inside an availability group can't be restored. You have to take it out of the availability group, do the restore, and then add that database back into the availability group. So what you want to do is you want to restore the database, whatever the data that you need to restore. You want to restore that database under a different name on the primary server, not in an availability group. Then just move the data from the newly restored database over into your normal database. Move it with insert commands, update, delete, whatever you need to do, join between those databases. But that's the easy way to do it as opposed to trying to restore the database in place, which would break your AG. Drop table in places. I too have run update queries without highlighting the where clause. And it's sad that we don't have an easier solution for that in the year 2023. My Oracle friends are always like, you don't have flashback by now? We have that, and I'm like, meanwhile, I'm like, yeah, let's see your licensing bill and then let's talk about that. Now, but I will say, in fairness, Oracle has the ability to rewind the database to points in time or rewind tables to points in time. And it's sad that we still don't have that in SQL Server, but at the same time, it still sells licenses like crazy, so I can kind of understand why they haven't done that development. They're much too busy focusing on things like, I'm not even going to make the jokes. Next up, Pete asks, how important are non-equality columns? To answer that, go check out my class, Fundamentals of Index Tuning. In the class Fundamentals of Index Tuning, I teach you how to figure out which column should go first in an index. It's one of those questions where all the time people, yes, that's absolutely true. All the time people say, I got lost when I looked at the Redgate thing over there. The other thing is problematic about that is you have to install it on everybody's management studio. But Pete, all the time, I ask this in DBA interview questions where my clients will say, hey, can you interview this DBA for me? And somebody will say, I'm a senior DBA with 340 years of experience. And I'll be like, great, which column goes first in an index? And they'll be like, the most selective. And I'm like, how do you figure that out? By querying the data. Wrong. Nope. Not even close. It's one of those urban legends that's out there, and it tells you that somebody hasn't actually done the performance tuning to understand where they really should go. And that's what I teach you in my Fundamentals of Index Tuning class. Next up, Safraz says, hi Brent, from your weekly links, I see that Eve Online has been using SQL Server for a long time. Have you ever done consulting for them? Normally, when I do consulting with shops, they'll often make me sign a non-disclosure agreement, but I'll tell you that I have not done any consulting for Eve ever. Like, I don't have to worry about making disclaimers or whatever there. I have done consulting for major gaming companies, and sometimes that means electronic gaming, sometimes it means gambling. I have done consulting for companies that large and much larger, but so to answer that, that absolutely has been the case. I've been lucky enough to have really fun clients, and I always really enjoy that. Next up, we have Peter says, what are the top reasons why SQL log shipping breaks? Oh, for me, number one, by a long shot, is security problems, where all of a sudden the log shipping subscriber can't access the folder where the backups are being stored. Number two, by a long shot, is people accidentally deleting log backups. And you're like, how on earth does that happen? Some bozo sets up a delete script that goes through and sweeps out files older than a certain number of hours, and they apply it to the wrong folder, and they trash the folder where we're doing log backups for log shipping. So those are the top ones in my book. Another one, so this is an interesting question. So Robbaco says, I've got two create index statements in the same database. Could they lock each other? One of the cool things about SQL Server is that you can put your database change commands like create index, drop index, etc. You can wrap those in a transaction. So you can say begin tran, create index. You wouldn't want to do this in production because very rapidly you're going to see that you'll have a blocking pile up, that you'll be blocking lots of other people. But this is useful for you in a development environment. You can say, all right, I'm going to take 2 tables and create indexes on each. I'm going to do a begin tran create index on one table. I'll do a begin tran create index on another table. And then you can see for yourself whether or not they're blocking each other. I love this trick for demonstrating the locks that are being held open by a transaction while that transaction is running. So give that a shot. Do the 2 and begin tran. Very, very useful. Next up, PhilRich says, I have an automated process that restores backups to a test server and then runs CheckDB and then reports on all the databases. Should I also run CheckDB in production? There are a few reasons. So in theory, what you're describing works very well because in theory, what you're doing tests the backups and you can be sure that if production does have a problem, you have good clean backups that you can restore from. In practice, I'm going to give you 2 issues with it. One is that I've seen people's jobs break and them not know about it, where they're like, I'm looking at my emails. I haven't gotten any failure warnings in 6 years. Everything must be going okay. A lack of failure warnings does not mean success. So you want to make sure that the jobs are actually working and they're doing what you think that they're doing. I'll give you a great example of that. One of my clients had this kind of process up and running for years. And they said, don't worry, Brent, we don't need to run CheckDB in production. We have this automated process. I said, great, show it to me. So we go and look at it, and we look at the job history, and it had been succeeding for long periods of time. I said, can you do me a favor? Can you expand that? Show me what it's doing. Let's expand those steps. And we expanded the job histories, and in there it had like 10 steps in it. The first several were failing, and then the rest were succeeding. All of a sudden, everybody sits up a lot further in their chairs. And what we found out was that the job that copied the backup over was failing. So for years, they'd been restoring the same backup file and checking it for corruption. So I'm like, well, good news. That backup that you have from 2 years ago, we can all be real doggone sure that it is completely free of corruption. I don't really know how useful that is, but there you go. The other thing that can be problem, I know, right? That's a different story. The one about the room full of suits, that was awesome as well. Another thing that can be problematic is the lag time. If it takes a long time to restore the database elsewhere and run CheckDB against it, that's a long lead time before you find out about corruption. So what I'll tell people is if you can run corruption checks overnight on your main SQL server, you should just do that. Don't get too fancy. Just start by doing that. If you want to run restore and CheckDB, you're totally welcome to do that too. But if you've got enough maintenance window where you can run it every night in production, stop being fancy. Just do that. Drew has a question. What's the best monitoring software for all kinds of different databases? I have no idea. I tend to focus my work on performance tuning Microsoft SQL Server. I can't even stay in touch with all the different monitoring tools that are out there for SQL Server, let alone for all the different other databases. So for that one, I also, the other thing that I'd be careful about is the more platforms you try to cover, the more it starts to become jack of all trades, master of none. So try to find the best monitoring app for the specific products that you want. And there are even different compatibility differences between Postgres, Aurora Postgres, and Azure Postgres, especially when it comes to monitoring. So there's no easy, quick answer for that one. Mike asks a career question. How do you explain what a DBA does? The way that I usually do it when someone asks, usually when they ask me what I do, I just say I do computer consulting, and it's rare that they drill down beyond that. But if they do drill down beyond that, it's because they have some familiarity with computers. And at that point, I can explain what a database is, and they already know. They're like, oh, you mean like Oracle or MySQL or Postgres? And I'm like, yeah, exactly like that. But if someone has no idea what's happening inside of computers, I usually use the classic ATM example. You know how when you go to a bank, you want to put in your PIN and you want to get money out and you want to see your balance, and all that has to happen quickly, no matter which ATM you're at worldwide. If it's not responding quickly enough and it's the back end, they come to people like me. Now, I don't usually work for banks because banks tend to be giant enough and they tend to work with more legacy type systems that it's not me. But if people want to know more, I'll say, your favorite e-commerce sites, the ones where you go and buy things online, response time has to be very fast. That's the kind of work that I do. I'm not the only person involved with that. There are web developers, middle tier app developers, but this is just part of that scene. And then we'll do one more. Kevin, yeah, exactly. Kevin says, what's your least favorite part about being a consultant? Finding clients. Finding clients is so hard when you're just getting started. Now, I don't have that problem anymore because I've been doing this for like 20 years. But when you're just getting, not consulting for 20 years, I think it's like 15, 16, something like that. When you're just getting started, it is insanely hard to find clients. Business development is very tricky. It's not like you can just go ask random people on the street, hey, do you need any work done? And if you do ask random people on the street, the average billable cost for that tends to be fairly low. So the best advice I can give you is if you think that there's going to be any time in the future where you're going, exactly what Code with Sean says, and finding clients willing to pay what is needed instead of lowballing, needed by you, that is. So the biggest piece of advice that I would give someone, if you think you're going to be a consultant at some point in the next 5-10 years in your career, start a blog now, start a social media presence now, present at user groups now. You want to start building up the amount of people who know your name and who can recognize you, and it takes a really long time in order to do that. Unless you get in early on TikTok as a database person, in which case it might be relatively easy for you to get in on the ground floor because there's not a lot of us in here talking databases on TikTok right now. So that's pretty good for a first shot there. We've been going for like half an hour. Oh, there's like 58 of you in here. Very cool. So if you have any questions about SQL Server, actually don't put them into PollGab right now. I am going to erase all of the messages that are out there so that we can restart again from scratch. And then that way we'll reset, because often as questions pile up in there, we got a whole lot of low voted stuff that hasn't been asked or hasn't been upvoted at all. So I'll go clear the queue out, and now you can go put your questions in, and then other people can upvote them. So it is 9 a.m. out here Pacific time. I need to go check in on my backyard and go see how the backyard contractors are doing. Today they're putting in electrical lines for the outdoor lighting. Should be kind of interesting. Code with Sean says, I run a .NET user group. Come speak at my user group and get experience. And the thing with user groups, user groups, should I talk about this now? Yeah, why don't I? The thing with user groups is there are only 15 or 20 people there. And often they don't have authorization to hire you for things. They're there because they're relatively low in their career and they're trying to learn in order to gain skills and move up. If you want to get work, speaking at user groups is rarely going to result in someone immediately paying you a check. However, I'm not saying you shouldn't speak at user groups. You should. Speaking at user groups helps you gain the confidence about what it is that you know. It helps build your local network. It will not get you paid quickly. And it also makes you more comfortable speaking in front of strangers, because that's a big part of what consulting is speaking to managers you don't know, speaking to stakeholders that you don't know, being comfortable in your own skin, and being able to see, Surly Dev says unless they're hybrid user groups. But see, the thing is with hybrid user groups, a lot of those people are from all over the world. Even if you say you get 100 people from all over the world, odds are the exchange rate isn't going to work out in your favor most of the time. Also, political rules may not do well in your favor. There are some countries where it's very difficult to hire subcontractors or contractors from outside of your local area. The way that it really makes sense for if you're going to work somewhere else and get consulting in another geographic location is to live somewhere where the cost of living is really cheap. Say Thailand, just to pick something, because I know a couple of contractors or consultants who've moved to Thailand. They have extremely low expenses every month, so they can lowball their rates relative to everybody else in the world and make it more likely that they get gigs. Mexico is another one. But it's really hard to make money quickly at a user group. I just wanted to mention it though, because Code with Sean is right. It's good for experience. I just don't want people thinking, oh, when I hang out my hat as a consultant, all I have to do is go speak at a local user group and I'll get business. You most likely will not. Now, the other way to think about it is you as a technology professional, not Sean, although Sean could think of this too, but you as a technology professional, when was the last time that you were sitting in a user group and you went, after this session finishes, I'm going to go talk to this person and hire them to do work? For most of us out in the audience, that's probably not something we said to ourselves. We might say, if we're lucky, we might say, I'm going to go subscribe to this person's blog, or I'm going to see them again the next time that they present, or maybe I'll go to find the book that they've written. Surly Dev says, maybe I should have turned the volume down. I've had that problem with Siri all the time. Siri pipes up on the watch here. I'm just trying to make sure that she doesn't wake up, but it drives me crazy when all of a sudden she'll be like, I looked for and I couldn't find anything. But so just be careful when you're saying that you're going to go to user groups and go make yourself $1 million. So the question was, what's the hardest part about being or the part that I like the least about being a consultant was finding work. These days, that's not really true. The clients, I have to beat them off with a stick. I have to be careful how I phrase that. I get enough clients that I can turn down a lot of work. These days, I'd say the thing that I like the least is probably people who see the blog and they think, oh, it's one database person with a blog. I can probably get them really cheap. Because every now and then I'll get somebody who's like, oh, I just need you to restore this database. It should only take you 20 minutes. Can you remote desktop in and I'll give you $100? I'm like, yeah, no, I'm not really interested in that. All right, so let's stop there and I will go check in on my backyard people and I will see y'all at the next office hours. Adios, everybody. See if I can find the stop button.